In this video, you're going to learn how we do our rotational grazing and how we created our pasture map. I'm Natalie Lucier from Waykeeper Farm and Nerdery, and I love rotational grazing for a number of reasons. The biggest one is that it helps our pasture go further. So that means that our sheep are able to get more forage than if we just let them go on the entire pasture at the same time, because each little piece of pasture gets to rest in between each time that we rotate them on the same area. At the moment, we're currently rotating about 3 or 4 times on each part of our pasture. We have just under 4 acres that we're rotating for about 6 sheep. There's also another 12 acres where there are horses, and we don't currently use that for rotational pasture. Some other major benefits of rotating your animals on pasture is that it improves the soil quality and improves the forage over time too. When you let your animals graze whatever plants they want over a huge area, they're going to eat all the good stuff that they want first, and they'll never touch the not so good stuff. What that means is that the best plants get eaten down and have a harder time surviving and coming back, and so you end up with poorer and poorer pastures over time. But when you rotationally graze, the sheep or whatever animals you have will end up eating pretty much everything in that area because that's all they have to choose from. And because they're able to eat down everything, it essentially eliminates more of the weedy plants and keeps those great plants that you really want that are high value and high nutrition for your animals. And my favorite reason for rotationally grazing is, you guessed it, carbon sequestration. So as you are grazing, it essentially gives the grass and all the other plants time to grow both above ground and more root system. So as your animals come in and graze, they will eat the tops of those plants down, and then some of those roots die back, and those roots that are sequestering that carbon will stay in the soil. So this is one of the biggest reasons why I especially love rotational grazing.
I heard the quote that farming is the art of moving things from one place to another. And when it comes to animals, you have 2 choices. You can keep your animals in one place and then you do the work of moving their manure on a daily basis, or you can move the animals and let the poop fall wherever it does, and you don't have to move their poop. So I much rather have the animals moving than me doing all the moving of their manure.
So now that you know why you should consider rotationally grazing, let's take a look at how we designed our pasture map and how you can do it too. So the first thing I'm going to recommend is going to Google Earth or heading to your county to see if they have any land maps for your area. Google Earth is great because it's free and it's pretty instant, so you can just type in your address and you'll get an aerial shot of your area. So what I did is I took a screenshot of that, and then I used a program like Photoshop, or you could use Canva. There's a bunch of other options to essentially draw the outline of my area. And so this is our house, this is our front lawn, this is our garden area, and then these are the barns that we have, and these are different paddocks that we use currently for horses. And then this whole area is the part that we're rotating. This is our pond, and then these are some berms that we have that are more raised up. What I did is I created this file, and then I just printed a bunch of copies of it. And then now that I have these copies printed out, I keep them in the barn, and I come in and I circle and make the shapes for the different pastures that we're doing. And then I write in the date that our sheep are in there, so I know to wait at least 30 days before I put the sheep back in the same spot.
I also tried to use a spreadsheet to keep track of my grazing, and what I found is that as soon as I got back onto my computer, there was something else that needed my attention, and I was always forgetting to update my chart. So there are some downloadable grazing charts you can download and that are available for free. You can also still use your screenshot from Google Earth and then just name and add a row for each of the different paddocks areas. But what I also found is that a lot of times it didn't fit that neatly, and there were some days where it was more of a rectangle, sometimes it was more of a triangle, and how I could fit things with the way the land and trees are.
Now you might be wondering, why would you wait 30 days between putting the sheep back in? That's because sheep have parasites and worms, so you really don't want them eating the grass and the food where they had pooped recently, because those worms and parasites might still be in there and just kind of waiting to hitch a ride back into their bodies. So that gives me how long I have to wait in between each period. Beyond that, it's really important to think about how long you can keep your animals in a certain pasture. I say never more than 3 days. 5 is the absolute maximum, and that's from all the research I've done. And again, it comes back to some of those parasite issues, because parasites do develop fairly quickly, and the way that they hatch and all of that, they can come back into your animals quickly that way and start to multiply. The other reason is you want to make sure that your animals get enough food. So if you leave them too long in an area, area, they're going to eat everything down to a stub and there will be nothing left. It'll be really hard for your pasture to grow back, and then also they might not have had the nutrition that they needed from being there too long. So we try to rotate every 2 days. We sometimes rotate every single day, and part of that really depends on what's in that spot. One of the mistakes I made when I was first started with this whole idea of rotational grazing is that I was going for 3 days each spot no matter what the pasture was like. And what I realized is that not all pasture is created equal. There are some spots where it's extra wet and the grass doesn't grow as well, or some spots where it's just barren land and the weeds are still in there, so there's not as much good quality value forage there. And other spots are just really pugged, which means there are tons of steps and things just didn't recover since the last time. So I try to just observe what is available for them to eat, and then of course I check every time I check on the sheep to make sure that they still have enough food and good food value, and decide if I should be moving them or not. Now, the other thing that this kind of map really helps you do is calculate how many spots you have to rotate on your pasture. So you can calculate if you have enough space for the number of animals that you have in the groups that you have. So we currently have all our female sheep together and all our male sheep together. So that means we need twice the amount of rotational spots. So again, you can use Google Earth, and they have a drawing tool that you can use to map out the exact length of your electric fence, which is what we use. So you can see exactly how many times you could fit your fence into your area. And that will give you the number of pasture rotations that you have available within 30 days. And in our case, we realized that with about 4 acres, we were able to rotate 3 to 4 times in the season. So other thing to really keep in mind is that this space may not be usable the entire year round, depending on where you live. In our climate, when everything is covered with snow, we are not going to be rotating on this whole area. The other thing we learned is that you don't want to put your animals out on pasture too early, because they will hug everything if it's super wet in the early spring, which is definitely the case in our climate here. So definitely make sure to check the conditions before you put your animals out there, because it could hurt that part of the pasture. And so we try to wait as long as possible until the grass is growing really fast and really lush before we start putting our sheep out there. The other benefit of doing this kind of mapping is that if you write down what grows in each area, so for example, if you have certain types of grass or certain types of things that you seed over time, then you could maybe plan that out according to the seasons. So what we found is that the grass slows down in the summer when it gets really hot and dry, and so we've planted other things to help with that. So you might plant some brassicas, like some kale and some daikons, and sheep love to eat those. You have to make sure they don't overeat it, so you want to plan that accordingly too. But those are things that can help supplement during those drier months. If you're enjoying this video and getting value from it, please give it a thumbs up on YouTube. So in my case, I have a bunch of these, so I know exactly which month it's for. I have the date on each of them, and so I can come back to these at the end of the season and see what worked, what didn't work, and plan better for the next year. And these types of maps are super helpful when you're doing a pasture walk. Now, a pasture walk is when you take one of these and you take a walk in your pasture and you note down what you notice. So if you notice there's an extra spot that is really wet and not much is growing, or that's really bare and you should plant some seeds to get those growing over there again, those are the kinds of things you want to note. You can also jot down elevation and slopes, so if you know that it's going to be extra wet during the spring or the fall, you could put your animals in a more sloped area so they have some dry space and they're not going to be in the water as much.
Now go watch the next video to see why we picked sheep as our dairy animal, and come meet our sheep.